Hello, Archie Dunlop here with Talking Astrology with Archie on Thursday, October the 3rd, 2024. Of course, my main topic today is going to be what's happening today, Thursday, October the 3rd, and I'm going to be looking at the astrology and the I Ching for today. But I also have a couple of topics I want to mention. There is, of course, the debate that we just had in the presidential elections, the vice presidential debate between J.D. Vance and Tim Walz. As far as I understand, I looked at one fairly progressive-leaning newspaper that quoted a poll that indicated that J.D. Vance won the debate. So yeah, as far as I understand it, J.D. Vance won the debate, but I don't think it was a particularly big deal. So I just want to look at the two men's charts at the time of the debate. I don't want to go into great detail about the subject. And I also want to look at Keir Starmer. So Keir Starmer, the leader of the Labour Party in the UK, also the British Prime Minister, he has been getting a lot of flack recently. And I was just wondering, what is happening in his chart, and do we get sort of some indications about what is going on? Because if you look at Keir Starmer's chart, even though I don't have a time of birth for him, there is actually something quite dark about his chart, which I haven't really looked at before, and that's something I do want to explore. But anyway, before I do all that, I want to turn to the astrology and the I Ching for today, which is Thursday, October the 3rd, 2024. As always, just have to remind you that if you like this video, I would be very grateful if you were to indicate that you did indeed like it by pressing whatever the button is that shows that you like the video. And also, if you're not subscribed, I'd be really happy if you were to subscribe. So anyway, let's look at what's happening today. So you can see, in terms of the thumbnails, there's Keir Starmer, then top left we've got J.D. Vance, and there's Tim Walz. In that picture, he's wearing glasses. I don't think in a debate he was wearing glasses. Why do people have this thing about glasses in public life? They feel they just have to not wear glasses in public. It's kind of a bit strange, isn't it? I don't know. Anyway, so let's see what's happening. We've got the moon still in Libra, and the moon at noon in New York was at 20 degrees Libra. The moon is now very much waxing, so we had the new moon, the annular eclipse yesterday, so we're now in the waxing stage of the cycle. It's still pretty early in the cycle. I don't think it's quite time to maybe reveal our secrets. I do take the view that the new moon is quite a secretive time, but there may be some things that we're getting ready to reveal. Perhaps we've been working on them, thinking about them, planning them, but maybe now with the moon separating from the sun, maybe we should wait until moon's gone through Scorpio, because the moon does go into Scorpio quite soon. I think by tomorrow the moon will be starting to move into Scorpio, but at the moment it is in Libra. It is going into the Via Combusta. So remember, the Via Combusta is the part of the sky between 15 Libra and 15 Scorpio. It goes into the Via Combusta every month, but that period when the moon is in late Libra, early Scorpio, things can be a little bit up in the air. Things can be a bit unstable. We might have plans. We might assume that things are going to work out in one way, but they end up working in another way. So with a Via Combusta, we have to be flexible, because despite our best efforts, things might go wrong in one direction. So we might have to somehow make up. But it can all be okay. I mean, it's not that the Via Combusta need be unfortunate, provided we're able to sort of think on our feet. Now, the moon is making two main aspects. The moon is making a square to Mars, and it is making a trine to Jupiter. So moon square Mars, it can raise the tension a bit. It can be about people perhaps finding it a little bit uneasy in terms of their communication with each other. That is certainly possible. Perhaps just Moon in Libra is just trying too hard to be civilized, and there's Mars in Cancer. There's emotion lying under the surface. So we try to be reasonable, but sometimes it's not enough to be reasonable. In fact, it's possible that our very reasonableness may cause upset. Sometimes people can actually be too reasonable, perhaps in the face of something that is maybe quite serious. Then the moon moves on and it makes a trine to Jupiter. Moon in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini. I would have thought that that is a pretty fortunate aspect. It is a minor aspect, but I think it's fortunate. It allows us to be optimistic, and perhaps we don't have to get too deep into things. I understand Venus is in Scorpio, but perhaps we can talk about things in a sort of a civilized way. And I suppose with that moon square Mars, if we feel that the emotional tension, pressure is rising, and we're able to sort of rework things, maybe with the moon trine Jupiter, we can reduce the temperature and make things more civilized. But overall, I would have said that astrologically, there's not a great deal going on, at least in a geocentric sense. We've had the eclipse. That's done. The annular eclipse. Of course, the effect of the annular eclipse will run for the next few weeks. So it's not like the annular eclipse has gone away. It's still with us, and its impact is going to still be felt, but sort of on a day-to-day level, I don't think that there is quite so much going on. So that's probably about it geocentrically. So I was looking at things from a New York perspective. Let's just have a look at things from an Australian perspective. Australasia, East Asia, just to see if we get sort of a different image. You can see that the moon is at 13 Libra at noon in Sydney, and whereas at noon in New York, the moon was at 20 Libra. So I suppose if you're in Australasia, the moon is making that square to Mars. It's more of a moon square Mars day than a moon square Jupiter day. I mean, I think you're going to start to feel the moon square Jupiter towards the end of the day, but I think for most of the day, certainly until the mid-afternoon, the moon Mars square is going to be more important. So if you are in Australia, I think you might have to tread more carefully in terms of not hurting people's feelings than, say, if you're in the Americas or Europe. Turning to the heliocentric picture, putting the sun at the center of the solar system. Let's just see if there's anything going on here. So Venus is still square Neptune, but it's sort of moving on. So I don't think that there's much to report about that. Venus square Neptune, as I said yesterday, we have to be a little bit careful about impressions and what kind of impressions we pick up. We might be very sure about certain people and understand people's personalities, but with Venus square Neptune, there's always scope for a surprise, and Venus can relate to art, and so I suppose with art and what looks good, so our imaginations might be finely tuned, and in terms of what kind of art we're attracted to, it might be art that is kind of quite otherworldly. So that might be the thing that is most appealing. I suppose in terms of what we look like and the impressions we give, we don't want to give an impression that we're too definite. I think Venus square Neptune does like a little bit of ambiguity. And really, that is about it. Mercury, heliocentric Mercury, is making an opposition to Chiron. So with Mercury opposition Chiron, if we take Chiron as the maverick and Mercury as a planet of communication, some of us may feel that we just want to communicate in such a way that gets attention, and we just might be tempted to say something just to get a reaction. I'm not sure if that's a good thing. We don't want to just get a reaction for the sake of it, but if you feel that no one's paying you any attention, then maybe you'll just have to say something that's off script and get them to sort of sit up and listen. Also, Mercury opposition Chiron could make us somewhat troubled, perhaps because we're aware of someone hurting, perhaps some sense of injustice, and that might make it difficult to relax. And I suppose that might be a good thing, just being aware of what is happening out there. And finally, on an optimistic note, the Earth is sextile Jupiter. So the Earth at 11 Aries is sextile Jupiter, which is at sort of 10 degrees 32 Gemini. Earth sextile Jupiter, I would have said, is an entirely positive aspect, and it does give us a sense of optimism, a sense that we can sort of make things happen and that things are actually okay. And it connects maybe with the fact that geocentrically we've got Moon trine Jupiter, so heliocentrically we've got Earth sextile Jupiter. So it does seem that today has plenty of silver linings, and that things can happen, and if we take an optimistic approach, then we are in a sense aligning with the universe, though it is Earth sextile Jupiter. With a sextile, you've got to consider a little bit of effort. Things are not just going to be handed to us on a silver plate, but if we make some effort with an optimistic mind, then I think the results could be very favourable. And now I want to look at today from a perspective of the 12 signs. I do think astrologically that there isn't a great deal happening today. There's not a great deal to report. So maybe I can say less than usual. I always say this and I never succeed, but maybe my forecast can be shorter than usual. But anyway, let's see what happens. So these are my forecasts for the 12 signs for today, which is Thursday, October the 3rd, 2024. Aries. Aries, you can make things happen. So if you are not satisfied with what is happening, you can make a fuss. You can cause a storm. If you really feel that it's the appropriate thing to do, you can do something that just no one is expecting. And it might be quite dramatic, but it gets everyone's attention, and people can just stop what they're doing, and they're forced to think about things from your perspective, and this may allow you to seize the advantage. Though, Aries, you should not forget that the moon continues to move through Libra, your opposite sign. You can't just assume that other people are just actors in your drama, that they'll do things your way, that you can just tell them what to do and they'll just nicely align. It's not like that. You do have to make a special effort to understand people, to understand people's strengths, weaknesses, preferences. You've got to bear that in mind. So if you don't bear that in mind and you try to make a scene, then yeah, can you expect much to happen? You have to use your sensitivity in order to sort of fine-tune your message. But if your timing is right and everything is in order, then I think that yeah, you can have a very powerful impact. Though it may not be necessary. There is a trine aspect between the Moon and Jupiter today, and with that Moon trine Jupiter, I think that your ability to communicate will actually be very good. You get your message out, people understand it, and you always have to give people something. You can't get something for nothing. So I think if you want something to happen, it's just very important that you're able to make some kind of an offer. It doesn't have to be very big. You appear to be giving something away, and it doesn't bother you, but it gives you the impression of being reasonable and generous, and you might not be reasonable at all, but just giving something away, I do think is going to be very important. And at the same time, just a reminder, Venus is moving ever closer to that trine to Mars. So Venus is now at sort of 13 Scorpio, Mars is at 16 Cancer. So they're about 3 degrees away. And so that Venus trine Mars, Aries, is giving you a growing charisma, and it's a kind of charisma, but it's quite subtle. It's not obvious. You don't have to push it. It's just about you, and you don't actually have to say much. Just be yourself, because you're starting to sort of emanate a natural charm, which I think that people are starting to pick up on, and you give the impression of being someone that does understand. And yes, you are capable of completely destabilizing things if necessary, but if you're not doing anything, if you're just being there, you could actually, in a way, seem to be a force for stability. I mean, remembering that Mars is still making a trine to Saturn. I mean, that Saturn trine is not exact, but it is still very much there. In fact, you could argue that we really do now have a grand trine in water signs involving your ruling planet Mars, because at the moment Saturn is actually on the Venus-Mars midpoint, and so that does allow you to be in control without necessarily having to do anything. So I do think that is very fortunate. Now, one reason why you may feel that you have to make a fuss is the fact that the moon is opposition Chiron. So Chiron has been in Aries for some time. It's a slow-moving minor planet. Of course, it's actually a comet. But with Chiron moving through Aries, it is a time when you feel that you have to take a stand at sometimes. If something is wrong, if something is being done wrong, and if there's any sort of injustice out there, you're very aware of this. And so with moon opposition Chiron, there may be times where you see that something is amiss, that perhaps someone is being treated badly, and under those circumstances, you perhaps have no option. You have to say something, and that's perhaps what you can do. Don't think about yourself and your own selfish needs when you're considering making a fuss, making a scene. Perhaps you have to make a scene because of something else, people behaving badly, someone being treated badly, and something has to stop. And so perhaps, Aries, what might happen is that at some stage your sense of justice might kick in. Taurus. Taurus, you probably are still getting over the annular eclipse, the sort of eclipse of the sun, which we had yesterday. And that eclipse, it can be quite exhausting. It's a big change. The moon moving from being waning to waxing. The new lunar cycle is upon you, and I think that with that eclipse, Taurus, you may be very aware of what needs to be done. As I was saying yesterday, and also what I was saying yesterday is, I think, Taurus, you do have a certain sense of responsibility, that it's kind of down to you to make things happen. No one else is going to make it happen. And there are just things that have to be done. And I think that is something you can explain very well. And Venus, by the way, which is your ruler, is starting to make a trine to Saturn. And so with Venus trine Saturn, that does make you quite responsible. You understand what you're supposed to be doing, and you also know that in terms of you and other people, there are boundaries, and those boundaries have to be respected. And you can certainly see how you might be vulnerable to other people's influence. I mean, that is very clear to you. But at the same time, Taurus, I think you're going to be quite good at protecting yourself, sort of explaining that you have your time that needs to be respected. And I think that people are going to understand that. And you should also consider your well-being. I said yesterday that this eclipse could be about health and well-being, and we get this continued emphasis on this, and you have to look after yourself. You have to remember, Taurus, that you haven't got all the energy in the world, and that if you were to be all things to all people, if you were to be here, there and everywhere, you would just be completely exhausted. So you do have to sort of give yourself a break and give yourself time, and the time to see things through in your own way, and just not feel that you have to be always available. And I actually think, Taurus, in some respects, you will benefit from a bit of solitude, just being in a place where you can recharge your batteries and not feel that there's any pressure. And some people could be trouble. It is possible, because there is a square aspect between the moon and Mars, and this moon-Mars square could mean that there are a couple of people who are just, I don't know what's wrong with them, but they just seem annoyed about something, and they could inflict their feelings on you if you give them a chance. So I think the message would be just to not give them a chance and avoid people who talk too much, particularly if they're talking about things in an animated and emotional way. So if you're in a conversation, whether it's face-to-face or over the phone, and you can hear someone getting emotional, and if you can hear someone getting defensive, then that is the time to end the phone call, to suggest perhaps that you've got something else to do. I think you'll be able to handle it. So I think that's a broad message for today. I don't think there's a great deal else going on. I think the main thing today, Taurus, I would have said, is just to look after yourself and just understand that you haven't got all the energy in the world, and make sure that everything is in order and that you have plenty of space. And if you can make sure that's all in order, and perhaps you should be generally putting yourself first, then I think today should be okay. Gemini, it's interesting that we have got Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith. I say interesting because I kind of just noticed it. I mean, I didn't mention it in the introduction. I should have mentioned it in the introduction. But anyway, it's there. Mercury is true black moon. Mercury is conjunct true black moon Lilith, and that may say something about your thoughts, what you're thinking about, and with Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith, some of your thoughts could be a little bit dark. You're not really thinking about things just on the surface. I know Mercury's in Libra, and it's very nice that Mercury's in Libra, but Mercury in Libra can be tempted to exist on the surface and not want to get too deep into things. And with Mercury making a conjunction to making a conjunction to true black moon Lilith, it may feel that it has to go in deeper. But it's just some things you just can't help thinking about. Now, this may be a good or a bad thing. It's certainly a time, I think, of honesty, maybe. Being honest about the way things really are, and perhaps being honest about the way the past is. And certainly not a time to be afraid. And sometimes if you want to be creative, if you want to do something that is really special, you have to go down deep, and you have to deal perhaps with emotions that you're not entirely comfortable with. And that would be moon conjunct black moon Lilith. And maybe there are things in the past which you haven't fully connected with, and now with Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith, you can actually start to make those connections. And so I think in this case, I think it's probably a good thing that Mercury is conjunct the true black moon Lilith. It really allows you to really tune into who you are. And Geminis very often are curious. They sometimes have that choice. Do I want to ask a question? Do I not want to ask a question? It would certainly make things easier if I wasn't to ask the question, but then I need to know. Geminis always need to know. Sometimes Geminis can ask too many questions, but I don't think so in this case. And the moon is also making a trine to Jupiter. So the moon is in Libra, which is very much a Gemini-friendly sign. It's an air sign. Moon making a trine to Jupiter. And I would have said, Gemini, that trine is pretty fortunate. It allows things to move. You can make things move, and perhaps it might feel that you had to deal with something that was holding you back. There may have been moments where you felt that sort of material realities were preventing you from moving, and you were wondering how were you going to be able to get the show on the road, but you keep pushing, and then suddenly it all becomes easy. So we may get a transition from stress and doubt and conflict, and you keep pushing, and suddenly it all moves, and you can start to think positively about the world and what's going on. And you really mustn't doubt yourself, because it is a time when you can really assert yourself. If need be, you can assert yourself in quite a big way, and perhaps you don't need to go over the top. It's just enough to make it clear that you want something to happen. At first there might be conflict, but keep moving, keep pushing, and all of a sudden everyone gets out of your way. So Gemini, don't underestimate your power. To begin with, it might not feel that you have much power, but if you keep moving, if you keep pushing it, then I do think that you can really start to make things happen. And I think that people will start getting out of your way, though you do need a certain sense of responsibility. It's not all about you. It is about what other people need, and it's also about their sensibilities. And people do have sensibilities. And I think it would help if you made some effort to understand these sensibilities. I mean, sometimes Geminis can be accused of being schizoid. I mean, I'm saying this as a Gemini myself. So by schizoid, let me explain what I mean by that. Of course, I'm not talking about it in a clinical sense, but with schizoid, it's perhaps about being able to separate things out. You know, separating, for example, the mind from the body, the mind from the emotions, and it can be all about mind and sort of forgetting about what else is going on out there. And in particular, human feelings and human sensitivities. Geminis can do this. And so perhaps, Gemini, you do need to make a special effort to understand what people want, where people are sensitive, and perhaps even where people are hurting. If you can understand where people are hurting and what might hurt them, then you can just be so much more sensitive and so much more reasonable. And just spending just a few minutes reflecting on what you're doing and what impact you might be having, can make all the difference. Cancer. Cancer, the moon continues moving through Libra, and this means that it is a time where you can start to consider your grounding and what makes you feel safe and what makes you feel secure. I was saying something very similar yesterday, and so that is kind of good news, but you are perhaps being a little challenged. So yes, the moon is moving through Libra, but the moon is also starting to move into the Via Combusta. And, that means that when it moves in late Libra, 15 Libra and beyond, and so with the moon in the Via Combusta, Cancer, you mustn't assume that everything is going to run entirely to plan. You have perhaps your view about the way the world is going to run, the way today is going to run for you, and you might have things planned, and stability is going to be, I think, quite important. But just things can happen that you really hadn't planned for, and you have to be able to act quickly. Plans have to be changed. It's no good just being annoyed or feeling frustrated that things are not working out your way. Because if you just do feel if you are annoyed and frustrated, well, when nothing's going to be happen, then you're going to be feeling stuck and angry and frustrated. No, you have to, if possible, anticipate what's going to happen. So if you've got a plan, or if you're involved in something, perhaps think about how it could go wrong. Also, perhaps think about how people could be unreliable. Think about how family members could be unreliable. It is absolutely possible. Your family may not behave as expected, or things in your own home. You may be making assumptions that particular items are just going to work. They may not just work. Maybe they'll decide to malfunction. I don't think in a particularly major way, but all of this can happen with the moon moving through the Via Combusta. And also, there are two aspects to consider. The moon is making a square to Mars, and it is also making a trine to Jupiter. Now, that moon square Mars is going to perhaps be more of an influence if you're in Australia or New Zealand, or less of an influence if you're in the Americas. But with that moon square Mars, there may be moments today where you feel a certain amount of anger. Something just annoys you, and you feel that you just have to say something. in that way that Cancerians can do. Cancerians can really show their anger and irritation very powerfully. So what's it all about, and is it worth it? Sometimes it's a good idea to show anger because it can get results, but other times you're just letting off steam and you're creating a difficult and uncomfortable situation with no actual benefit. And so if you do start to feel angry and annoyed, just ask yourself, what is the right approach? And also try to think ahead, because the moon, yes, it does make a square to Mars, but the moon also makes a trine to Jupiter. And that trine to Jupiter is, I would have said, entirely fortunate. Moon trine Jupiter allows you to feel happy and comfortable, and you don't need to rely on anyone else. And there may come a point today where the outside world can sort of disappear, can sort of fade away, and you're in your private world doing what you enjoy, doing what you feel is useful, and all of a sudden everything comes together, everything is relaxed, everything is calm, and you're on the right course. So was it really worth getting annoyed earlier in the day? Probably not. So try to find that moon trine Jupiter in whatever you are doing. So moon trine Jupiter is about feeling happy. It's about feeling comfortable. It's about feeling optimistic. It's sort of believing that tomorrow is going to be better than today, and that today is better than yesterday. So try to find that moon trine Jupiter in everything you're doing. And if you can't see that moon trine Jupiter, try to look ahead. So a forward-looking, optimistic attitude, Cancer, can really help you out. And you don't need anyone else. It can all happen on your own terms. Leo, you are not satisfied. And I mean that in a positive sense. Or rather, I hope you are not satisfied. Because, if you are truly satisfied, can you really expect anything to happen? I mean, you can't. I mean, it's not possible, because we have an issue of complacency. But I don't think you're complacent at all. So, what's going on here is that the sun. We're looking at the sun. The sun is your ruler, and it is opposition the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint. So the Jupiter-Pluto midpoint is at about 10 degrees Aries. So with the Sun opposition Jupiter-Pluto midpoint, you're able to really tune into the energy of Jupiter and Pluto as a pair. And as a pair, Jupiter and Pluto are really very focused on making things better. You really want things to be better. You're not satisfied with the status quo. The status quo has no appeal to you, or it should not have any appeal to you. If you're honest with yourself, that maybe you're doing an okay job, but you could be doing a better job. And so look at what you're doing across the board and ask yourself, are you really giving it your best shot? And perhaps consider the things that are especially important to you. Maybe the things that you feel that you're an expert on. Yeah, you might well be an expert on, but there's no room for complacency. You could be even more of an expert. And you also have to take into consideration the changing world. Things happen. There are developments. I mean, I suppose, what do they call it? Continued professional development. I don't know whether that's relevant to you, but recharging yourself, renewing yourself, making sure that you're knowledge base is completely up to date. I do think that that's going to be very important today. And with the sun in Libra, it is a time for a bit of study, maybe reading something, watching some video, maybe of an educational nature, and working out how it fits in. So, in a way, there is a message of great optimism here, Leo, because things can get better, and you can actually make them get better. And there are so many sources of self-improvement. It can also be about other people. Other people have things to say. They know things that you don't know, and you can really take advantage of them. So, in a way, Leo, it's kind of up to you. It's up to you what happens. You could be lazy. You could do nothing, which would be a shame. And I think you'd feel bad about it. There would be a sense of guilt that you've kind of missed an opportunity. But I really don't think that's going to happen, Leo. I think that you're very in tune with what you need to do. And so perhaps also you're tuning into the energy of the eclipse. So we had this eclipse yesterday, and that eclipse was a new cycle for you, a new way of seeing things. And with this eclipse, you can also you're starting to see where the gaps are. It's perhaps about knowledge, but not knowledge for the sake of knowledge. It's about knowledge for some broader purpose. And so through self-improvement and self-renewal, it's not just about making sure that you can answer other people's questions. It's about aligning yourself to the future and making sure that you're ready for the future. And so I think that this is quite optimistic. Though I suppose if you take this on board and if you decide that self-improvement is important for you, which of course is good, there's no need to hurt yourself about it. There's no need to exhaust yourself. That's unnecessary. You don't want to be a complete fanatic once you've decided you need to get into self-improvement or feel that it's going to be too late if you're not careful. Just do what you're comfortable with, and don't exhaust yourself, and just take advantage of everything that's around you. Because I think, Leo, there are a lot of things available to you, because it's like the whole world, the whole universe wants you to fulfill your potential. And so, that's kind of a great position to be in. Virgo, you might be feeling the impact of Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith. So with Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith, you are aware maybe that not everyone is nice, that not everyone can be trusted, that the world around you is complicated, and that you can't really take people on face value. I mean, it's nice to take people on face value, but you always have to consider what's going on underneath, and perhaps you need to look beyond the mask. And it's also about your mask as well. And sometimes people are a bit upset when they reveal the truth about themselves. What is the truth about yourself? What are you hiding? What aspects of your personality are you not proud of? Well, maybe you should just see your personality as a whole. There's nothing that you should be concerned about. We all have our secrets, and perhaps with this Mercury conjunct true black moon Lilith, it's about seeing yourself as a whole person. And accepting some of your sort of darker thoughts. Remember, we all have dark thoughts, and sort of bringing them into the light maybe, and starting to actually think about it and being honest about who you are. And I suppose in terms of other people, it may be that some Virgos are tempted to ask questions, just probing questions to see what the situation is really like. You know, what happens if you scratch the surface? What do you get back? And perhaps you get back something you weren't expecting, or someone else's mask slips. And that might just be a lot of what today is about. Where are the masks? Are they slipping? How much are they slipping? And just knowing that the truth is a virtue. If you know the truth about something, if you shine light on something, then it becomes less destructive. Indeed, what can be destructive can also be completely positive. Now, one thing about money, think carefully about other people's motives. Think carefully about your own motives. You know, if people are talking about money or making financial suggestions, always ask yourself why. You know, what actually are they trying to achieve? And it's not just people on an individual personal level, it's people at the level of the organization. You know, people try to sell things, people try to push you to take on board particular products. You know, there's always a motive. And I think that today you're going to be very aware of that motive. Now, continuing on the financial theme, you know, I can go on about Black Moon Lilith, but I could also mention the fact that the moon is making a trine to Jupiter, and that moon trine Jupiter could be quite fortunate from a financial point of view. It gives you a certain amount of financial luck, and if there is a financial opportunity today, Virgo, then I think you might actually be in a very good position to take advantage of it. I mean, you've got to be able to think positively with that moon trine Jupiter, and just ask yourself what could happen if you were to give it a go. Of course, if you don't give it a go, then I suppose you can't really expect much to happen. So consider what you could do in terms of money. Maybe it's just about calling someone. Maybe someone owes you money and you don't think you can get the money back. Maybe you can get the money back. Maybe there's money that's been owed to you for years and you haven't made an effort, or you've forgotten about it. There's just something you can do which can be, you know, very useful in a financial sense, and you will have, I think, a certain amount of luck in this direction. Libra. Maybe Libra, you need to be a little careful about what you say, because today we have got a conjunction between Mercury and true Black Moon Lilith, and this conjunction does take place in Libra. And so Mercury is a planet of communication, and Mercury may be about the things you want to talk about. And it just may be that some of the things you want to talk about are things that people don't want to hear. Perhaps it seems a little bit distressing, or you're dealing with things that represent the past, and a past that no one really wants to worry about. So, Libra, you are a great diplomat. You can be a great diplomat. You can be very careful in terms of your speech, but it may be that you feel that some things do need to be discussed and you don't really care how much upset you cause. So, in that case, with Mercury conjunct true Black Moon Lilith, you can bring up subjects that are difficult, perhaps that represent the past. You may cause upset and offence in the process, but maybe you'll just take the view that that is actually the right thing to do. And so that's just a word of caution I thought I would start with. Now, sort of yesterday we had the new moon eclipse. The sun and the moon are still in Libra. And so in some respects, it's quite a fortunate time for you, because the immediate new moon is now over. And so now you've got the sun and moon both in your sign. So you do have a certain sense of oneness. The sun and the moon are working together. The sun is not overwhelming the moon. And so you have a sense of who you are. And I think you can actually relate very well to your past. And it's all starting to make sense. Now, there may be moments today when you perhaps feel that you do need to assert yourself. I think that's going to be particularly true if you're in Australia or New Zealand, and maybe Europe and Asia to a lesser extent. I don't think this is such an issue in the Americas, but the moon is making a square to Mars. And I mean, okay, in the Americas you'll feel it to some extent, because Mars is in a cardinal sign, it's in Cancer, the moon is in Libra, but perhaps in the Americas you're going to have to try a little bit harder to harness that moon-Mars energy. So that moon-Mars square can make you very decisive. Moon is in Libra, it's in your sign, you have an understanding of what's happening around you. Mars represents your ambition, and so with that moon-Mars square, you can assert yourself, tell people how you want things to be. They might not like what you say. They might not like the kind of things you want to talk about. But if you are really persistent, I'm fairly confident that you can get your way. Though, try not to cause too much upset unless you feel that's really something important for you to do. And the moon, having made that square to Mars, it goes on to make a trine to Jupiter. And that trine, moon in Libra, trine Jupiter in Gemini, I would have said is entirely fortunate. You have a sense of what you can do, and you feel that you're on the right track. And also, I think you feel that the universe is on your side. So you battle for a bit. It's a bit of a struggle, but then after a certain moment, after a certain point, you suddenly realize that you are on the right track, and things really are starting to move for you. And it's a time to be very open-minded. The more open-minded you are today, then I think the luckier you're going to be. And if you can be enthusiastic about something which you're not entirely familiar with, then you might be rewarded. So don't feel that you have to stick to the straight and narrow. You can perhaps move your boundaries a little bit further than you maybe wanted to, and in the process you can just find something really sort of new and optimistic. And so that certainly looks good, though you don't have to be super social. You don't have to think that other people are the be all and end all of everything. In fact, Libra, a bit of solitude, maybe not solitude, but a bit of separation can actually be very good for you, because you need separation to work on things. If you're with other people all the time, then there may be a certain sense of claustrophobia. And, I understand that other people are important to you, and you do at the end of the day have to consider their feelings, but still a bit of separation could do you a lot of good. In fact, a bit of separation could be good for everyone, because if you have some separation, you'll start to get some kind of perspective, not just on yourself, but on other people. And you perhaps may start to realize who is important and also who needs your help. Someone might need your help because there is an opposition aspect between the moon and Chiron today. And that moon, you've got moon in Libra, opposition Chiron in Aries. And it just may suddenly occur to you that something is maybe not right with another person and that perhaps you need to do something about it. It won't be easy, I don't think. But if you just have a feeling that someone needs help, then maybe you should act on that feeling. And it just may not be what you want to do, but it might nonetheless be the right thing to do. Scorpio, you're in a position where I'm thinking that you can make waves. It's easy to discount Scorpios, particularly today. We've just had the annular eclipse in Libra, and people might have been just forgetting about Scorpios for the last day or two and thinking that Scorpios didn't matter. Well, I don't know what Scorpios are doing. Maybe Scorpios were just hiding under a rock or whatever Scorpios wanted to do. But Scorpios are in the picture, and Scorpios can really make things happen if they want to. Yeah, Scorpios can pack, one hell of a sting, and you're ready. And if something needs to change, if you feel that things have just got a bit stagnant, then perhaps your sting can make all the difference. And I think that your sting comes from nowhere. So it's not a good idea to underestimate Scorpios, even if they appear to be hidden, even if they appear not to be in sight. There are things happening behind the scenes, and Scorpios can suddenly become very, very apparent. And, Venus is, of course, also starting to move towards the trine of Mars. Of course, Mars is your ruler, and Venus is in Scorpio. Venus is in your sign. So with the growing influence of this Venus-Mars trine, which is now only 3 degrees apart, it's getting closer. You can start to have an increasing impact on the world around you, and also an increasing sensitivity about what is happening. So even if you're nowhere to be seen, you understand it all, you get it, and you are observing things, and you're forming pictures, and you're getting some idea about what your next step is. And I suppose, by tomorrow, the moon will be moving into Scorpio. And, sometimes people are afraid of surprises. People are just comfortable as they are. And what is the surprise? I mean, the surprise could be Scorpio. You might be the surprise that other people are trying to avoid. I'm not saying today is a day for surprises. It could be, but it could be tomorrow. The moon, as I said, the moon is moving into Scorpio. So I do get the sense that you are quite strongly placed, but timing is important. Now, there is a square between the moon and Mars today. I think you're going to feel that moon-Mars square, particularly if you're in Australasia, but I think all Scorpios will feel it to some extent. And with that moon square Mars, there may just be a moment where you feel you have to do something, and it may be out of just plain anger. Something just annoys you, and you just feel you have to say it, you have to do it. But you have to ask yourself, is your timing right? Just because you are very annoyed about something doesn't mean you have to act on that annoyance. You perhaps need to allow the thing to sort of develop, and perhaps you haven't quite got the full picture. So the moon does make a square to Mars, but it does also makes a trine to Jupiter. And I think that trine between the moon and Jupiter allows you to really ask yourself some serious questions and really to get to the bottom of things in your own way. And maybe that's what you need to do first before you actually contemplate external action. So maybe, Scorpio, that's what the day is all about. It is getting your timing right. And today might be the day, but maybe it's tomorrow when the moon moves into your sign. But what I do think, Scorpio, is that over the course of the day you are going to have a growing sense of your own power. Sagittarius, you are right now fairly influential. I mean, you may not feel yourself to be influential, but I think you are. And I think that people are taking you seriously, and they're prepared to listen to what you say. And if you make some effort to assert yourself, then I think that you will be noticed. And you shouldn't forget that you yourself have powerful feelings, and you have powerful feelings about certain people, and you also have powerful expectations. Now, of course, there's no reason to go over the top. I mean, you don't want to be unreasonable, but your willpower is strong. And so if you want someone to do something, your way, then I think there's a good chance that it can actually happen, like that you can really assert yourself. But you don't want to make it sound as if everything's too complicated. I mean, it may be complicated, it may feel complicated, deep down, but you want to very simply explain to people what you want and perhaps why they're important to you. And, that might be enough. And, in general today, we have this moon trine Jupiter. Moon trine Jupiter is a very friendly aspect. The moon's in Libra. The moon is in a socially aware sign, at least from a Sagittarian perspective. And Jupiter is in Sagittarius. It's your opposite sign, a sign very much connected with relationships in a Sagittarian chart. So that moon trine Jupiter should help your social life and relationships really at all levels. So I think your relationships with other people, they should work very well. And I don't think actually you have to try too hard. Yes, there is sort of a manipulative streak there, which you might want to exercise, but perhaps you don't have to be manipulative. Perhaps you can just be yourself and become part of something, the group, the crowd, and without getting overwhelmed, because you won't be overwhelmed, because I think that your personality is going to be sort of come over in a way that is really sort of loud and clear. So perhaps, Sagittarius, you should just regard today as just being a typical textbook Sagittarian day when you can just be yourself, but with a slightly serious tinge. And that tinge comes from the fact that you have a strong sense of desire, a sense of desire which one doesn't perhaps normally associate with Sagittarians, but the desire is very much there. There are things you want. Maybe there are people you want. There are people you want to have around you. And that desire is going to perhaps be quite motivating. Obviously, you've got to keep the desire in perspective, and you don't want it to get out of hand. But the desire principle, I think today, Sagittarius, is quite important. And I suppose it's important to get the balance right. You have to think about what you want, but you also have to think about what other people want. You don't want to sort of alienate yourself. But overall, Sagittarius, it's just nice to have a nice Sagittarian day. Moon trine Jupiter, that's a wonderful aspect. Capricorn. Capricorn, there is a grand trine coming up in water signs, and I do think that this grand trine does have an impact on you. So, let me explain this grand trine as I see it and why I think it might have an impact on you. So, Saturn is your ruler. It's in Pisces, and it's at 14 Pisces. Mars is at 16 Cancer, water sign, and we've got Venus at 12 Scorpio. So if we look at that grand trine, we notice that the midpoint between Venus and Mars is around 14 Virgo. And we can see that by eye. So Saturn is opposition the midpoint. So that means that that grand trine arguably is exact, and that Saturn is really at the center of this grand trine because Saturn is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. And as a result of Saturn being on the Venus-Mars midpoint, I believe that you actually have a considerable amount of charm and charisma. And, I think it's really quite strong at the moment. And, you might not see it, but, if you make an effort, I think that people are going to be attracted to you today. And so if in the past you have felt that it was difficult to get other people's cooperation, or perhaps to get people to notice you, or you perhaps felt you were being ignored, things are changing. If you make some effort, not a great deal of effort, this is a grand trine. The whole point about water grand trines, or indeed any grand trine, is that they don't require much effort. Things just run smoothly. So if you make any effort to assert yourself, or to get people on your side, to negotiate, I think things will just run really well for you, and you'll just have no difficulty being noticed. Yeah, sure, Capricorns can be low profile, they can be modest, they can be asking themselves, why am I special, all this kind of thing. But maybe in some respects today you are special, and people are going to respond very well to you. And this means that, whatever's important to you can work out. For example, if you feel you need to be noticed, if you feel that you've got some ambition that you want to achieve, then yeah, you can go out and achieve it because you're going to be helped by everyone else's positive response. So Sagittarius, do not doubt yourself. And at the same time, I think that you're going to be able to, if you want, you're going to be able to move into sort of difficult areas that you're not entirely comfortable with, or maybe other people are not entirely comfortable with, and perhaps talk about difficult subjects. Now, in the past, you might have felt that the moment wasn't right, but right now, I do think the moment is right. If it's ever going to be right, no guarantees that you won't cause offence and it won't all be a disaster. But if there's any time to talk about difficult subjects, then I think maybe it's today, because I think you just have the gravitas and, in a sense, the attractiveness. Certainly the charisma to be taken seriously. And so, overall, Capricorn, I think it can be a great day when you can really be noticed and when you can really have an impact. Aquarius, I have a similar message to the one I was delivering to Capricorn, because Aquarius, like Capricorn, you have Saturn as your ruler, And Saturn's position at the moment is really very interesting with this grand trine in water signs. And as I was saying to Capricorn, Saturn is trine Venus, it's trine Mars, and in fact Saturn is right now is on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So that is really good. It means that you have a lot of charm, and people are going to take you seriously, and through your clever words and also perhaps your sensitivity, you are, I think, going to be able to sort of get what you want. So perhaps, Aquarius, you have to think, well, what is it that you want? I mean, it may be quite down to earth. It might be about things. It might be about money. If there's been any financial concerns recently, or you feel that someone has been holding back on you financially, then I think that with Saturn aspecting Venus and Mars, now might be a great time to broach the subject. I think that you won't have to try too hard, and I think the other person, as far as the other person is concerned, or the other organization is concerned, it will be absolutely obvious that you've got a fair point. And it may also just be about what you are trying to achieve. If your work is important to you, if you have a job, or indeed if you're trying to get a job, I think it could be a good day. I think you'll know how to come over in the right way, and your social skills, I think, are going to be better than average. We've got Venus starting to make that trine to Saturn. Okay, that Venus trine Saturn is not exact right now, but you're starting to feel it. And I think with that Venus trine Saturn, you can get noticed, and particularly in a situation where we're talking about your ambitions and where you're asking yourself, how can particular people help you get to where you want to go? I think that you really can make the right impression. So it's just very important you don't give up on other people. Perhaps recently you've perhaps felt there wasn't any point, but today things are changing, and I suppose it's important perhaps not to be too shy. And if you feel that something needs to be said, or you're trying to impress someone, then what can be better than Venus and Mars trining Saturn being on the Venus-Mars midpoint? And yeah, you are an exciting and interesting person, and I think that is really becoming very clear. Also, we've got a trine between the Moon and Jupiter, and the Moon is in Libra, Jupiter is in Gemini. They're in air signs, you're an air sign, and I think that Moon-Jupiter trine it's quite inspirational, actually. It allows you to be forward-thinking and positive and believing that everything can work out in your favor. So even if you start the day feeling a little bit negative, a bit of positive thinking can make all the difference. Now, I am not normally a fan of positive thinking. I think positive thinking can actually achieve the opposite effect. I think that with positive thinking and affirmations, I'm not convinced it works. I think it can actually stop you achieving your ambitions. I mean, perhaps that's because I'm a bit of a negative thinker, but positive thinking, I'm not a fan by and large, because I think that positive thinking can just lead to fantasy and delusion, and in the end it can lead to disappointment. But I think in your case today, with that Moon trine Jupiter, positive thinking can actually make all the difference. So if you start the day feeling a bit negative, you're Aquarius, Saturn-ruled sign, what's the point? Think positively, think about all the things you'd like to achieve, all the reasonable things you'd like to achieve. Obviously, if it's unreasonable, you're not going to achieve it, are you? Or I suppose you might be able to, but still, a bit of positive thinking on your part, maybe a lot of positive thinking on your part, can give you a further boost and can help you, take advantage of what I think from an astrological point of view does look like being a very good day, if you're just ready to make the most of it. Pisces, we do have a grand trine in water signs at the moment, and as a Pisces, you are very much aware of what is going on, and so this does give you a sort of a great sense of being sensitive and feeling that you are in tune with everything, and so you can be in tune with other people, and you can also create a sense of structure. You're going to be very good at creating structure, and perhaps if certain relationships have been a little bit up in the air and a little bit unstable, and you haven't quite worked out what's going on, then now is a time when you can actually bring them down to earth. Now, one thing I do want to say is I actually want to apologize, because in my last video I was talking about Pisces and water damage and water, and I suggested that if you're a Piscean plumbers might not be watching this video, and that was a quite unreasonable thing for me to say, to think that Piscean plumbers might not be watching the video. I mean, because as someone pointed out in the comments, if you're a Pisces, I suppose plumbing would be a sort of a natural profession, as someone pointed out. Thank you very much for pointing that out. I mean, that is obvious if you're a Pisces, because plumbing is all about water and how water moves. And I suppose if you're a Pisces, and even if you're not a plumber, you just might have a really good awareness of how water works. So I did want to get that apology out of the way. I should not have suggested that Piscean plumbers might not be watching the video. That was unreasonable of me, and I think just demonstrated perhaps unreasonable prejudice. That was a sort of instinctive thing, and I should not have said that. So my apologies on that score. But as far as what's going on today, I think that you will benefit from that grand trine in water, and if you happen to be a Piscean plumber, I think perhaps you can really use that grand trine in water to just really help you understand what's going on, what the water system is doing, where the water is moving. Even if you're not a Piscean plumber, I think you'll just have a good feeling for pipes and plumbing and washing machines and things like that. So yeah, it's good news, this grand trine in water. And also, I suppose, with Saturn trine Venus, Saturn trine Mars, in some respects, maybe that gives you the ability to control water. So maybe if you're working with ponds and lakes and things like that, maybe that's okay. Well, of course, you always have to be careful with ponds, and particularly lakes and rivers, because you don't want to fall in and you don't want to drown. And so that's not something you want to do. So that's a grand trine in water. And overall, Pisces, I do think that you are going to be quite serious. I think that you're going to be aware of your ability to be taken seriously, and there'll be something about you that is quite sort of grave as in gravitas, and even a little bit intense. And so there isn't much lightness today, and I think that is a good thing, because you perhaps understand the way things are. And also, we've got a lot of stuff in Libra. We have got we've just had the eclipse in Libra, and the solar eclipse, and I think that eclipse was for you quite intense, and it gave you powerful insights which maybe you're not always able to discuss, but they're real. maybe you can't verbalize them, but they're real and you understand them on an emotional level. And also we've got that moon in Libra is trine Jupiter, and of course Jupiter is your ruler. And I do think that moon trine Jupiter is going to give you a powerful insight into just what makes you feel comfortable. You know where you feel uncomfortable, you know where you feel comfortable, and that moon trine Jupiter makes it easy to make the choice. And so that can be the foundation for everything else. If you know fundamentally what makes you comfortable, then you can build on that. And so that really is a good foundation for the future. And those are my forecasts for the 12 signs. And what I want to do now is look at today from the perspective of the I Ching. So I asked the question, what is Thursday going to be like for those watching the I Ching section of this video? And the first hexagram I got was hexagram number 43, which is flight. Now, the Wilhelm translation of the I Ching describes this as breakthrough, but Greg Winkup talks about it as flight. And there is this sense of danger, that there is a threat. And 43 is about understanding the threat and taking action. And one of the images of flight is we hear the cries of the prisoners. So we have an invading army. Some of our group are being taken prisoner. We can hear their cries. We hear their cries, and so we can get out of the way. So that is the idea. So that sounds very dramatic, and I don't think that you're in a situation where your country is being invaded or your village is being invaded. I don't know what might happen. But perhaps we're in a situation where something is not really working and it's starting to go wrong, and we have an opportunity to get out. We hear the warnings and we don't want to waste time. Once we hear the warning, where we see that something is not going to plan, that there's been a dramatic turn for the worse, then we don't pause to analyze, we just leave. So I don't know what that applies to in your life. You have to think about that. I'm sure it's not as dramatic as it sounds. And remember, this is a hexagram just for one day. So it just may be that something you're involved with, or people you're involved with, somehow you just get a feeling that it's not right, or you get a warning, and you get one warning. You're not going to get another warning, and you get a warning, and then you've got a certain amount of time to act accordingly. Now, there is a moving line. Top line moves. And the top line has another warning. And the other warning is this, is that there is a good chance that we'll leave it too late. It is absolutely possible we leave it too late. There is a strong inclination here to ignore the warning and to just carry on. And we carry on and it's too late and we're stuck. And whatever this bad outcome is, we might sort of get involved with it and we might just get overwhelmed. So does that mean that it's inevitable that we ignore the warning? Not really, no. I mean, there'd be no point in consulting the I Ching if it was inevitable, I suppose. Well, I suppose the I Ching might just be telling you what's going to happen. But it underlines the point, if you're in a bad situation, or if you're in a situation that you're not totally comfortable about, you might have a warning to get out. And there's a danger that you ignore the warning. But if you accept the warning and you act in a timely fashion, then you may be able to avoid whatever it is that you're concerned about. Now, because we have a line moving, the top line moving, we move to a different hexagram. And so when the top line moves, that means that all the lines are unbroken. So we move to hexagram number 1, which is the creative. The creative represents pure positivity. All lines are unbroken. And once the drama unfolds, this drama of feeling we need to get out of a situation, maybe we can get out of a situation, maybe we don't get out of a situation, whatever happens, we move into a very different situation. And it's something different, and it is about pure creativity. Maybe we can start again. There's no real clue about where precisely this creativity should be focused. It's just pure positivity. It's just focusing on something for the absolute sake of it. And I suppose it's about taking the situation we find ourselves in. Is it a situation that's come about because we've had a lucky escape? Is it a situation that's come about because we didn't have a lucky escape and because we're stuck in something? Whatever it is, we're now in a new place where we are in a position to start afresh, and we can draw down the creative power of the dragon, because there's very much an association with this hexagram and the dragon. We can bring the dragon energy down, and we can start to use it and focus it. And it's up to us, I suppose, to decide where we want to focus it, but we shouldn't think about it too much. It's pure creative energy, and pure creative energy doesn't really like to be structured. So perhaps it's a sense of just letting the universe take us where it feels. Okay, no, we need a certain amount of agency, but I suppose being aware that there is a lot of energy is going to be released. It's pure positivity, and I suppose it's up to us how we deal with it. And now I want to look at the debate that took place on October the 1st. Now, I didn't actually watch much of the debate, so I'm not going to say a great deal about it. From my very brief readings of the press, including the sort of progressive press, it does seem that there's some consensus that Vance won the debate. I don't know, but here's the horoscope for the debate. I believe it took place in New York. It started at 6 o'clock New York time, and so the moon was in very, very late Virgo, and it was void. It had made its last aspect before leaving the sign. I mean, when judging a void of course moon, I don't really look at outer planets, but it's even made the trine with Pluto. So if you've got something taking place with a void of course moon, the moon having made its last aspect before leaving the sign, then it does raise the question: what's the point? Where is it leading? And so that is perhaps a suggestion that the debate is perhaps meaningless. I mean, meaningless in terms of adding or subtracting votes. So that's the overall position. Okay, the moon is opposition Neptune, but perhaps nothing came to a point. And I think that's what people said about it. It was supposed to be good. People said that it was a good-natured debate. And maybe that's the fact that the moon is perhaps void. There's no point of conflict here, and so that would be a potential way of looking at it. Now, as far as the two candidates are concerned. So I don't have a time of birth for Tim Waltz. I mean, I know he was born on April the 6th, 1964, but in West Point, Nebraska, but I don't know what time. Maybe you know what time he's born, but I don't know what time he was born. So I'm just going to have just a quick look at, what might he have been experiencing at the time of the debate. And I mean, I don't think there's a great deal happening. North Node. The North Node was on his Mars. So the North Node at the time of the debate was at 639 Aries and conjunct his Mars. So perhaps the North Node represents what he should have been doing. Here he is, he has Mars in Aries. Mars in Aries would be someone who is very combative. He's into sports. He goes on and on and on about him being a football coach. That's really part of his story, isn't it? And so North Node conjunct Mars, what would be the advice here? I mean, if you've got North Node conjunct Mars in the debate, you're supposed to be combative. I suppose you're supposed to attack your opponent. Now, I was looking at some of the reports of this debate, including by people on people who were sort of liberal and progressive, and some of them were quite frustrated about Waltz. They said that he wasn't aggressive enough. It was too good-natured. He had a chance to really perhaps go on the attack against Waltz, but instead, being polite, saying they agree with each other and all this kind of stuff. Maybe North Node on Mars was the opportunity. But if North Node is conjunct his Mars, the South Node is, of course, opposition his Mars, and the South Node is if the South Node is in Libra, and so the South Node, the transiting South Node was opposition his Mars, and so maybe the South Node in Libra was somehow blunting the Mars. You'd expect the North Node on the Mars to have made him more aggressive, but perhaps this actually tells us how the North Node works. Perhaps when you've got the North Node aspecting a planet, the South Node can drag it away. And so maybe the South Node in Libra confronted his Mars, and somehow the South Node won. Why did the South Node win? Maybe the South Node was conjunct the Sun. The Sun was in Libra, quite close to his opposition of his Mars. So that Libran energy may perhaps have wrong-footed him. I mean, that's just a possibility. I just think it's just really interesting that the nodal axis was on his Mars, and he was being criticized for not being confrontational enough. So I think that's it. I think there's not a great deal else going on in his chart. So the North Node, North Node conjunct Mars, I think that was... North Node, also, look at the North Node. In his chart, he has got Mars semi-sextile Mercury. Now, semi-sextiles a minor aspect, and of course we don't know his time of birth, at least I don't know his time of birth. But when you've got two planets in opposite signs, in adjacent signs, you've got two planets that work quite differently. So there's Mercury in Taurus, which is how he communicates, how he thinks. It's a bit slow, Mercury in Taurus. But then Mars is in Aries. Mars in Aries is aggressive, assertive. That's Mars in Aries. And it's somehow in conflict with his Mercury in Taurus, or not necessarily in conflict, but it's quite difficult for him to bring together that Mercury and Mars. So maybe the North Node on his Mars was just creating a few issues for him, and it was just short-circuiting his Mars, and maybe his Mercury was just perhaps moving too slowly, maybe, and he wasn't able to respond appropriately to the situation. Now, turning to JD Vance's chart. Now, unlike Tim Waltz, we do have a time of birth for JD Vance. And I think with JD Vance, what we did see, I mean, I didn't see very much of it, but JD Vance was being kind of more reasonable than expected, or at least for his opponents were expecting. And we sometimes forget that JD Vance has Venus rising. Venus rising can be reasonable, can be quite charismatic, and someone who doesn't always rock the boat. Yeah, he knows how to rock the boat. He knows how to upset people, but perhaps his Venus on he was able to utilize his Venus in Leo rising, and that helped him perhaps win the debate. I mean, I don't know for sure whether he won the debate. Now, as far as what was happening at the time of the debate and whether or not it affected him, so no, that's actually the lineup between him and I'll do that in a moment. That's a lineup between him and Waltz. So hold on, let me just go back to Vance's chart, and we'll compare his chart with the debate chart. And so there it is. So I don't think there was anything especially dramatic happening. Anything happening here? Uranus was quite close to his ascendant, but this is a time he's been in for a sort of a couple of months. You see, Uranus was at 2653 Taurus, square his ascendant, but it wasn't exact, and it's just, I think, the time he's in. It's a time when he is getting a lot of attention, but it's not very specific to the debate. Maybe the debate is a peak. I mean, I suppose if Trump and Vance lose, then maybe this is a peak. There's peak publicity when he's actually there in front of the audience. If Trump and Vance lose, I'm still not convinced that that's going to happen, but that might be one way of looking at it. And the moon was in Virgo, and moon at end of Virgo was square his Neptune, and it was semi-sextile his Pluto. It may be that moon square Neptune, if you're perhaps one of his sort of enemies, you might say, well, that allowed him to confuse and deceive the American public. They perhaps saw a nicer person than he actually was. He wasn't able to. He didn't reveal his dark heart or whatever, and his super right-wing policies. So there could have been a little bit of confusion there, and also the fact that we had moon. The moon was opposition Neptune, so that moon opposition Neptune was hitting his Neptune. So perhaps his Neptune was really activated there. I mean, normally in a personal chart, in a private chart, you don't really think of Neptune having a really important personal impact. When your Neptune gets transited, is it such a big deal? But when you're dealing with someone public a politician who's trying to be president of the United States, vice president, well, yeah, that can be important. And finally, in terms of Vance and Waltz, I wanted to consider how the two charts came together. So on the inner wheel, I've got Vance. On the outer wheel, I've got Waltz. And Waltz has his Mercury at 6 degrees 4 Taurus. So that Mercury, 6 degrees 4 Taurus, is a very important way in which he communicates. Okay, Mercury in Taurus, it can be a very good debater, it can be very solid, it can get its facts right, it can move from one fact to another and build up the case. And Vance's Saturn is at 10 degrees Scorpio. And so Vance's Saturn was opposition Waltz's Mercury. Now, it may be that was a critical lineup, even though it's not exact. Maybe Vance's Scorpio, 10 degrees Scorpio Saturn was able to kind of close down Waltz's Mercury. So that is a way that it might have worked. And Waltz also has Moon square Mercury. So Moon square Mercury, you could say that it's quite communicative. You might say that. But it is a square. And somehow I think that Waltz's Saturn was able to have an impact on it. Well, of course, we don't, by the way, we don't know where Waltz's moon actually is because, we don't know, hold on, let me get this right. Waltz's, we don't know where Waltz's moon exactly is. It could be anywhere between 27 Capricorn and, 6 and 9 degrees Aquarius. It could be anywhere. But there's a possibility that Waltz has Moon square Mercury. And so Vance's Saturn might have been quite useful in this sense. But it's a vice presidential debate, and it probably doesn't count for much. And then I want to finish by looking at Keir Starmer. Keir Starmer is the British Prime Minister, and he has been getting a lot of flack recently. There has been what he's done. He voted to remove a fuel subsidy on pensioners, which was a major disaster. Then you had his taking gifts. Him and sort of other members of his government have taken gifts. Like, what was it, £75,000 worth of suits and new glasses. And this is a man who is apparently worth something like £10 million, pounds, I think, not dollars. And the dollar is worth more, a pound is worth more than a dollar. So why was he getting all of these gifts? And then there have been all these stories about his private life that have been starting to float around, and people are not really able to go into details because they're afraid of being sued. But there have been stories about that. So let's just look at Keir Starmer's chart. This is sort of to remind ourselves about Keir Starmer and perhaps some of the things I hadn't really looked at in the past. And with Keir Starmer, we mustn't forget that he has Sun conjunct Pluto. Hassan Nasrallah, the former head of Hezbollah, who was just killed by the Israelis, he had Sun conjunct Pluto. If you've got Sun conjunct Pluto, power can be very important to you. And now he's got his power, and I suppose you have these. What's the old quotation about power corrupting and absolute power corrupting absolutely? I can't remember the line exactly, but perhaps he's someone potentially who could be corrupted by power. And this Sun conjunct Pluto is semi-square Venus. Not exactly semi-square, but he does have Venus semi-square Pluto. So this is someone who really likes to sort of hold on to things. And power is quite important to him. And what I thought would be interesting would be to look at his 90-degree dial, to look at his chart from a perspective of midpoints. And I understand that this 90-degree dial might not always be particularly intuitive, but there's his Sun conjunct Pluto on the 90-degree dial. So let's just look at it. And this might give us some kind of an X-ray of Keir Starmer's personality and what's sort of motivating him maybe. And that Sun conjunct Pluto is opposition Venus. It's semi-square. It's semi-square Venus, but a semi-square on a 90-degree dial looks like an opposition, and so it's not really an opposition in the natal chart, but we can see that axis. So here is the Sun Pluto conjunction. That's him wanting power, and there's Venus aspecting Pluto, aspecting the Sun by semi-square, and that's how it comes over. So we're dealing with someone who is perhaps more complicated than it appears to be on the surface. And, perhaps given in terms of these questions about his private life and what's been perhaps happening under the surface, we see someone here with a 90-degree dial who we don't necessarily, who are not necessarily fully familiar with. He's not quite the person that everyone elected for, some honest, straightforward, managerial prime minister who's going to sort out the mess that the Tories, 14 years of Tory government caused. So there is something complicated here. And then we can start to see the midpoint. So we can start to see an axis of symmetry here. So where is the symmetry? And there is Mars and there is Neptune. You can see that he actually has a Hades-Neptune midpoint. So Mars is on, the Mars-Neptune midpoint and the Mars-Hades midpoint are both on the Sun and Pluto. So the Sun and Pluto is hitting the Mars-Neptune. Now Mars-Neptune is really complicated. That is the sort of weird energy. And to give you an idea about what Mars-Neptune is about, actually let me look at what Reinhold Ebertin says about Mars-Neptune. So just to get some sort of objectivity here. I mean, Ebertin says about the Mars-Neptune pair that it's irritability and weakness. So that may be some aspect of what's going on. So Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint, lack of willpower, discontent. He actually says a weak physique. He talks Pluto on it. This is interesting. Pluto on the Mars-Neptune midpoint. The tendency to cause damage to others brutally. So there is a sort of a brutality there, perhaps. Well, in terms of taking away the pensioners' fuel allowance. So that is an approach. But I do think that Mars-Neptune, it can be about sleaze. I mean, that's how I see Mars-Neptune. It is about sleaze. It can be about sleaze. And so here you have a politician who came into power with his aim to be I suppose part of it would be to fight Tory sleaze, and he's up to his neck in sleaze himself because he's got the Sun on the Mars-Neptune midpoint and he's got Sun on the Mars-Hades midpoint as well. So there's stuff he's involved in which potentially is quite dark. And so we're starting to see a side to Starmer's personality that, perhaps we haven't seen before, and the 90-degree dial is perhaps showing it up. And then his Uranus is quite interesting. I'm just going to point it out, but I'm not going to give any real comment. But there's his Uranus. And you can see that he's got Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint. So Venus-Mars is about sexuality and it's about attraction. And what's often said about Uranus on the Venus-Mars midpoint is it's someone who falls in love and out of love very quickly. There can be sudden attractions and suddenly getting really attracted to someone and then just as suddenly perhaps feeling not so attracted to them. So that may be part of his personality, and it may give some insight into some of the sort of rumours and scandals, I don't know, certainly rumours that are floating around him that people aren't really prepared to talk about, not in any detail. And so that's a few sort of extra bits of information about his personality. And then there is what's happening to him right now, and I did want to look at a couple of in terms of his solar arc directions. So turning to his chart again, I do not have a time of birth for Keir Starmer, but I do want to try to look at his solar arc directions to see if we can get any information here. So we put Keir Starmer on the outer wheel, and we have his solar arc directions, for October the 1st. So he has solar arc directed Mars. Remember what a solar arc direction is. you move every single planet 1 degree for every year. So he's coming up to his, 62nd birthday. So he's just had his 62nd birthday. So you'd move every planet approximately 62 degrees. So if you move Mars 62 degrees, he's got Mars at around 7 degrees Cancer in his natal chart, and you move that 62 degrees, Mars comes to 8 degrees Virgo. So you can see that Mars is approaching a conjunction with his Sun. And it's slow, and we won't really get it for another 6 months to a year, but it's starting to come into orb. And Mars conjunct Sun does represent potentially violence, upset. I suppose it could be about war. Who knows what's going to happen in Ukraine, what Britain's going to respond. Britain is absolutely desperate, by the way, for Ukraine not to lose, and seems to be increasingly prepared to take more and more risks. So that might be one aspect. But Mars conjunct Sun does not look good, and I think it bodes badly for the next year or two. And then we have got his progressed Sun-Pluto conjunction, and his progressed Sun-Pluto conjunction is moving towards his Neptune. So he's got certainly progressed Sun moving to a conjunction of Neptune. And again, that's not good news. That suggests a sense of dissolution, things starting to perhaps fall apart, and they're already starting to fall apart. Now, with Keir Starmer, I don't have his time of birth. So what do you do if you don't have a time of birth? And I was wondering whether you could just look at the new moon before he was born. So this is the new moon. He was born in Southwark, which is a part of London. And I've set the new moon. Should be quite an important new moon. This is a new moon before the birth of a British Prime Minister. And so, there it is. There's a new moon at just a day or two before he was born, a few days before he was born. There's a new moon at 6 degrees 16 Virgo. And the question is, can I use a solar arc direction on a new moon to make a forecast about Keir Starmer? In other words, I'm not even looking at Keir Starmer's horoscope. It's just a theory. But so what I thought I would do is I would do a solar arc direction of the Starmer new moon before he was born, and I will direct it through until to October the 1st of this year. And so what I find interesting is that there's Mars. So Mars, remember in his chart, Mars is sort of moving towards his Sun by solar arc direction, his natal chart. We don't have a time of birth, but of course a full moon is, a new moon is something very exact. And so if we direct the Mars, it's 5:55 Virgo. And in other words, it's approaching the new moon. So if you direct the lunation before he was born, 62 years, we find that Mars is approaching the Sun, the Sun-Moon conjunction, very, very quickly. And so I think that this, again, bodes very badly. So I think that certainly by next year, I think Keir Starmer is going to be in all sorts of trouble. And I think that this is actually shown as well by the chart for when Keir Starmer became Prime Minister. So here is a chart of the Keir Starmer regime when he, I believe that's a time, got the time right. I went for 12:20 p.m. on July the 5th. And a couple of points about this. So when he became Prime Minister, there was a conjunction between the South Node and true Black Moon Lilith. And so it was a very exact conjunction. And so that might give us a sense of what this regime is about. I'm thinking sleaze here, more sleaze. There's something that's going to get overwhelmed by this. This is just the beginning. And of course, we've just had this annular eclipse. So the annular eclipse, so if we look at the annular eclipse was at 10 degrees 4 Libra. So going back to the Starmer regime chart, this the annular eclipse was right on the South Node true Black Moon Lilith conjunction. So I don't really think that again, that bodes well. Now, another thing about this Starmer regime's chart, ascendant is 2 degrees Libra. We've got descendant of 2 degrees 41 Aries. What's going to happen is that next year, Saturn is going to move into Aries. Neptune is going to move into Aries. So Saturn and Neptune are going to move on to the descendant. So I haven't really thought about it very much, but I'm guessing that it's going to be very difficult for Starmer to survive beyond next year. Now, of course, that doesn't mean that the Labour Party is going to go, the Labour government is going to go away. They can find someone else to take over. But I don't think that things are going to get much better. One other thing about the Starmer regime's chart is that there was a new moon. It happened just before a new moon. That's really bad to start something just before a new moon. The lunar cycle was waning. Didn't they have an astrologer? Couldn't they have just told him to just wait a few hours, wait until after the new moon to become prime minister? Wait. But I don't know if that could have been arranged. Wait until after the weekend. This was a Friday. Couldn't he have let Rishi Sunak remain prime minister until the Monday? But no, it had to happen straight away. So just before the new moon, the moon is combust, moving to a conjunction of the sun. And, over the last week, we've had Mars making the conjunction to the sun. So Mars has caused all sorts of problems recently. And so it's not a great chart. And I think that when Saturn and Neptune move into Aries, I think that's when the Starmer regime is going to be in real trouble. And I wouldn't be surprised if Starmer himself has to go and someone else replaces him. Okay, that's it. That's all I'm going to say about politics, whether it's American politics or British politics. So thank you very much for watching. If you enjoyed this video, I'd be very grateful if you were to like it. If you're not subscribed and you enjoyed this video, I'd be super grateful if you were to subscribe. And if you want to buy me a coffee, there is a link in the description. So thanks again for watching, and I will talk to you again tomorrow.